When my father passed away, Diana assumed her scheme had succeeded. He never played a short game. The moment I laid the ownership deeds on the attorney's table, the expression on Diana's face could have stopped clocks. "This meeting is for legal beneficiaries only," the solicitor intoned. I leaned forward slowly, spreading the crisp papers. "You mean the properties I already possess?" Her painted smile didn't flinch, but her eyes told another story. Before I unravel the madness that followed, comment below where you're tuning in from. If you enjoyed jaw-dropping family betrayals and poetic justice, hit like and subscribe. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming. The call came on a gray Tuesday in Singapore. Raindrops traced frantic paths across my office windows while I closed a major real estate acquisition. Then my screen lit up an unfamiliar U.S. number. "Maxwell," Grace's voice cracked. "Your dad? He passed last night." I hadn't returned to Maplewood in half a decade. Not since our last volatile exchange sent me packing for Asia, determined to carve out success without his shadow looming over every move. I became someone in global development. But now, I was coming back, not as a welcomed son, but an outsider, clutching grief and unfinished business. As the taxi rolled past familiar streets and parked beside the old Victorian house I once called home, nostalgia hit me like a wave. The crooked basketball hoop where I learned to shoot, the porch swing that had held late-night father-son business dreams, the flower bed where we buried Mom. Time had shrunk everything. Or maybe my memory had inflated it all. 3 sleek vehicles cluttered the driveway, Diana's unmistakable silver Mercedes among them. Dad always drove a beat-up Cadillac, reliable, simple, honest. None of these cars felt like his. Dragging my suitcase up the porch steps, I barely reached for the bell. When the door creaked open, Brittany stood there, expression cool, voice flatter than week-old soda. "Maxwell, we didn't expect you." "He was still my father," I said, my tone devoid of emotion. She turned without further greeting and walked me into the foyer. All cold chrome and clinical whites. Gone were the mahogany bookshelves and buttery leather chairs. The house had been sterilized. "Mother's in the living room with guests," she added, offering no help with my luggage. Diana rose as we entered. A designer widow draped in black silk, surrounded by a flock of town elite, sipping tea and absorbing sympathy. When her eyes landed on me, she faltered for just a beat before smoothing her features. "Maxwell, how unexpected. We tried to reach you. Your contact details must have changed." "They haven't," I replied. "I'm terribly sorry for your loss," I added out of sheer politeness, though we both knew it was a performance. "The funeral is tomorrow at 2. Tyler piped up from a reclined chair, not even glancing. "In my direction, we've arranged everything." Translation, my input wasn't required. "Your old room's now storage," Diana chimed in sweetly. "We'll fix up the guest suite for you." I nodded, already suffocating beneath the artificial pleasantries. "I'll go settle in." As I turned, her voice floated after me like syrup hiding a needle. "Harold Stevenson is coming tomorrow. To handle the estate formalities? Just close family. I'm sure you understand." Oh, I understood. They planned to lock me out. Later, I found myself on the back porch, memories pressing heavily as I stared at the ancient oak tree that once held my childhood treehouse. Grace appeared beside me, her presence grounding. "They've been unbearable since your dad got ill," she murmured. "Diana's already whispering deals with developers, wants to slice Maplewood up and sell it." Grace had never left town. She ran her parents' hardware shop now. Her loyalty remained unshaken. She told me Dad's condition had worsened rapidly. In the past year, a fact no one had thought to share with me. "He talked about you. Max constantly kept your magazine interviews in his office." A knot tightened in my chest. "His office. Used to be," she corrected. "Diana cleared it out last week. Had everything boxed and hauled off. Even changed the locks." I thanked her and went inside, head pounding, heart racing. They thought they had it all, stripped of anything remotely personal. It was a place designed for politeness, not belonging. While unpacking, muffled conversation filtered through the hallway. "Once Harold verifies the will tomorrow, we'll finalize the Riverside transaction." Diana's voice drifted in, clipped, and triumphant. "Lawrence already submitted a proposal," she added. "What about Max?" Tyler's words were cautious. "Think he'll interfere?" Diana's laugh sliced through the air. "What can he possibly do? Richard allocated everything to us." Maxwell sealed his fate the day he walked away, perched at the bed's edge. I clenched the comforter beneath me. My chest tightened with a blend of loss and fury. Differences with Dad, sure, but I never disappeared. I made countless attempts, calls unanswered, messages ignored. Diana would always say he was preoccupied, unavailable, uninterested. Over time, I gave up. That evening, unable to settle my thoughts, I wandered the silent house. In the upstairs study, a few relics from my childhood remained untouched. On a shelf, I spotted a worn copy of The Count of Monte Cristo. Dad had gifted it on my 16th birthday, writing inside to Maxwell, "Remember, patience and precision always win." As I thumbed through its dog-eared pages, a hidden envelope slid free. Landing softly on the carpet, my pulse quickened as I opened the letter. Dad's unmistakable script stared back. "Maxwell, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer with you. Diana is unaware of this message or the measures I've taken go to First National Box 247. The access key is taped to the back of the Monte Cristo portrait in my office. No matter how things seemed, I never left anything to chance." Dad, adrenaline kicked in. I headed for Dad's study, where the door remained locked, just as Grace had warned. But I remembered a loose plank in the corridor's floor, Dad's old hiding spot for spare keys. It was still there, untouched. Inside the space had been gutted drawers, emptied shelves cleared, everything cold and generic, except for the painting. Carefully removing it from the wall, I found the tiny key secured behind the frame, just as he described. Tomorrow, I would head to the bank in Harold Stevenson's office. I was done playing guest in my own legacy. It was time to uncover exactly what my father had orchestrated. Being Richard Harrison's only child meant knowing square footage and zoning codes before learning to ride a bicycle. While other dads played catch, mine taught me how to estimate repair costs and read housing market trends. When Mom passed after a long illness, I was only 10. For 3 years, it was just the two of us side by side. He poured himself into raising me and running Harrison Properties, teaching me through experience rather than lectures. Everything shifted the day Diana Winters entered our lives, poised, persuasive, with a smile tailored for every room. She seemed to genuinely brighten Dad's world. At 13, I wanted to believe she might bring us happiness again. Her children, Brittany, my age, and Tyler, 2 years behind, moved in with their polished manners and choreographed affection. At first, we blended cautiously, pushed aside for ballet rehearsals or soccer practices. Room by room, Diana renovated the home. My mother's presence faded behind modern furniture and neutral palettes. I voiced concerns, but Dad always responded with, "They're part of the family now. Max, give them time." By 16, I felt like a visitor under my own roof. Tyler suddenly found a passion for real estate, and Dad responded with boundless enthusiasm. Yet the business kept Dad and me tethered. We shared a passion for brick, steel, and skyline potential. Harrison Properties, his life's crowning achievement, owned nearly a third of Maplewood's commercial holdings. What began as a modest rental unit had transformed into a powerhouse. "Assets endure, Max," he often said. "Cash flows, land routes, you." I absorbed those lessons like scripture, enrolling in top business programs and working every summer under Harrison's banner. From property inspections to lease agreements, I learned every layer of operations. When graduation came, I was confident and prepared. Dad had been grooming me for leadership until I discovered our shared vision had been quietly overhauled. He had set his sights on rejuvenating the downtown district. We'd crafted a strategy focused on accessible housing, mixed retail, and public space. I spent months traveling, studying successful developments, but when I returned, the blueprint had changed. Without warning, the inclusive housing component was replaced with luxury condominiums and boutique shopping. We went upscale, Dad explained. Diana and I felt it was the smarter play. Higher profit margin, more market appeal. That's not the direction we envisioned, I objected firmly. Our original idea centered around revitalizing the community, not building luxury towers only the elite could afford. "You need to be realistic, Maxwell," he countered. Diana has a remarkable sense for market trends. Tempers flared. A volcano of pent-up frustration erupted after years of feeling sidelined. I accused him of sacrificing long-held principles to appease his second family's ambitions. He claimed I was too rigid, too naive to navigate the complexities of leadership. Then came the final blow. "You're clearly not prepared for this level of decision-making," he said coldly. "Perhaps some distance would help you grow." That night, I packed everything I owned and booked the earliest flight to Singapore. A college classmate had offered me a spot in his fast-growing firm, and I accepted without hesitation. Determined to carve out my own legacy, I poured everything into urban development abroad. Over the next half-decade, I earned recognition for designing socially conscious spaces throughout Southeast Asia. My name appeared in international publications. I collected awards for innovation and environmental stewardship. My bank account overflowed, but none of that repaired the chasm between my father and me. At first, I still reached out voicemails, emails, holiday cards, but responses dwindled. Eventually, I gave up. I told myself he could find me if he wanted reconciliation. Grace's update had revealed otherwise. He had tried, but Diana had intercepted each effort, gatekeeping every line of communication. The following morning, I visited First National Bank with cautious hands. I unlocked safety deposit box number 247. Inside, a slim folder rested atop a flash drive. I located a quiet cafe, ordered black coffee, and slid the device into my laptop. One video file waited. He appeared on screen gaunt, hollow-cheeked but unmistakably my dad. His eyes held both sorrow and urgency. "If this message reaches you," he began, "it means I'm no longer around." His voice cracked. "First, I owe you an apology. I allowed Diana to wedge herself between us. That's something I'll never forgive myself for. But I never stopped believing in you, son, not for a second." He laid everything bare. For the past 3 years, he'd quietly reassigned ownership of the most significant Harrison holdings directly into my name. Riverfront lots, downtown commercial, strips, residential blocks, transferred via trusts and contracts designed to avoid probate scrutiny. Diana remained entirely unaware. I watched her manipulate my decisions. I saw how she promoted Tyler while disregarding your commitment. I couldn't stand by and let our legacy fall into hands that didn't earn it. He had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 2 years earlier. With limited time, he had taken action enlisting longtime confidant Franklin Ross to safeguard his plans. "The official will provides Diana with the house and enough financial support to keep her comfortable," he said. "But the true core, the heart of what we built, is already yours. Franklin will walk you through it." He ended with a look I hadn't seen since childhood. "You've always made me proud. Now come back and finish what we started." I sat frozen, tears slipping down my face as the screen faded to black. My chest ached, not just from grief, but from the realization that he had been quietly protecting me all along. Once I regained composure, I called Franklin. He agreed to meet that afternoon. When I arrived at his office, the same burly man who used to sneak me butterscotch candies in boardrooms greeted me with a bone-crushing embrace. "Took you long enough," he muttered. "He was worried you'd stay away forever." Franklin confirmed every detail. The asset transfers were legitimate, some gifted, others sold for symbolic amounts, all binding under law. Diana, it turned out, had been completely in the dark. She had already initiated conversations with Blackwood, an infamously predatory developer known for substandard construction and inflated price tags. The thought of my father's careful empire being dismantled by a man like Lawrence Blackwood filled me with rage and the reading of the will. I asked, already anticipating conflict. Franklin's demeanor shifted. "Harold's been in Diana's pocket for years," he said. "Your dad kept him around for appearances, but he never trusted that snake with anything real." Harold said. "The session for later today," Franklin informed me, eyes narrowing. "Your stepmother's already made it obvious you're not supposed to be there." I brushed my fingers over the folder tucked inside my case. "Oh, I'll be present," I replied calmly. Franklin's grin curled with mischief. "Richard would have been proud. He always believed you inherited his flair for a perfectly timed entrance." Exiting Franklin's office, I felt a strange calm settle over me, a sense of grounding I hadn't experienced since arriving back in Maplewood. My father had trusted me with the essence of his work. I wouldn't allow that trust to be misplaced. Diana and her brood had miscalculated if they thought I'd be a silent observer. Margaret Wilson, my dad's executive assistant for 2 decades, greeted me at headquarters with a warm smile. "Maxwell Harrison," she exclaimed, standing to wrap me in a tight hug. "I prayed you'd come." The environment inside the building had changed, colder. Polished surfaces, impersonal lighting, all bearing Diana's influence. Yet Margaret's corner still radiated familiarity. Neat files, paper trays, framed images including old photos of me. It hit me that Dad must have kept her updated all these years. "I have something for you," she whispered, handing me a flash drive. "Your father made me swear to deliver this directly. No intermediaries." I nodded my thanks, then inquired about how things had been running. Her mood shifted. "Things are different," she confessed. "Staff cuts, abrupt strategy shifts. Consultants with no history here advising the team. And Tyler, he's been promoted. But he barely shows up. And when he does, he creates chaos." I asked pointedly about ongoing projects, masking what I already uncovered from Franklin and my father's recordings. Her replies aligned with what I feared. Diana had been laying groundwork to dismantle everything Richard Harrison built, trading long-term stability for fast returns. "The waterfront proposal was completely redone," Margaret explained, voice tinged with sadness. "Your dad wanted inclusive housing and shared spaces. Now it's posh apartments and boutique stores. Construction's supposed to start next month under Blackwood's company. Lawrence Blackwood, just the mention of his name ignited fury. That man had spent decades assembling overpriced monstrosities, prioritizing profit over purpose. Before departing, I asked Margaret if I could visit my dad's old workspace. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Diana had it cleared out last week, said she needed it for the marketing team. I still insisted. The door opened to a room that once held blueprints, maps, framed accolades, a model train of downtown Maplewood. Now, nothing. Empty shelves, bare walls, sterile air, but standing there, my resolve hardened. This was no longer about inheritance. It was about defending legacy. Later, seated on a bench beneath a canopy of trees, I inserted the flash drive. Into my laptop, multiple video clips loaded. My father appeared on screen, walking through various sites, narrating intentions, aspirations, and context. These weren't just notes. They were lessons, reflections, confessions. The Riverside plot is vital, he said in one video, wind ruffling his thinning hair as he stood beside the water. We can offer a future here, not just luxury. We need diversity economically and culturally. This town deserves that. In another recording, shot inside his former office, he looked worn yet driven. I've seen your projects overseas. The community, spaces in Hanoi, the vertical farms in Jakarta. You elevated every concept we discussed. You were right about everything. I regret letting ego and influence cloud my judgment. By the time the last video ended, I fully understood not only what my father had preserved for me but why. He had safeguarded the projects that mattered, deliberately shielding them from Diana's grasp, trusting I'd know how to carry them forward. My final meeting that day was with James Patterson, the family's longtime accountant. His small office felt frozen in time. James shook my hand firmly. Richard said you'd come, gave me very specific guidance to follow once you showed up. We sat down, and he unraveled the intricate structure my father had quietly designed. Not only did he transfer select properties, James said, unfolding charts and ledgers, he also created Harrison Legacy Holdings, an entirely new entity. It exists under your name, outside of the core company. It's been accumulating value for 3 years. The setup was elegant, protective, foolproof. A shell that looked dormant from the outside, but inside was a fully operational machine, powered by key holdings. Diana's unaware, James added. She's been working off outdated information. She thinks she controls everything, but she was about to learn just how wrong she'd been. James laid out the paperwork with methodical precision. His desk covered in flowcharts, detailed ledgers, and legal records. From an outside perspective, he began, gesturing toward a color-coded document. Diana assumes she's acquiring the reins of Harrison Properties. But in truth, that entity has been stripped of its core holdings. His finger traced. Arrows on the chart. Everything essential, the commercial portfolio, the undeveloped tracts, the income-generating buildings was restructured into Harrison Legacy Holdings over the last 36 months through lawful, strategic asset, repositioning. I furrowed my brow. So what does she actually receive? Despite the turmoil, I couldn't help but wonder whether my father had left her completely out. James sighed, tapping another folder. Richard wasn't vindictive. He wanted fairness, not revenge. She's entitled to the residence on Maple Avenue, plus various well-funded accounts. Additionally, she'll continue receiving passive revenue from select properties, though not enough to wield influence or direct major decisions. He paused. She won't struggle financially. However, the command she anticipated, that's gone. Grateful for the clarity, I spent the remainder of the morning immersed in records, validating signatures, cross-referencing registrations, and confirming legal ownership. By noon, I was satisfied. Every transition bore legal weight. Every signature was legitimate. My father had architected his plan with foresight, ensuring that intentions would be honored despite what the official document might imply. A sense of calm settled over me as I prepared for the confrontation at Harold Stevenson's office, scheduled shortly after lunch. My resolve was unshakable. Yet there was an undercurrent of anticipation threading through my thoughts. Diana, Tyler, and Brittany had systematically edged me out of the narrative of my own upbringing. They presumed they had locked in a future, molded by control and wealth. They had no clue a reckoning awaited. Pulling out my tailored charcoal suit, I adjusted the sleeves and chose a navy silk tia, sentimental gift from my father on the day I signed my first independent contract. It reminded me of who I had been before everything unraveled. I arranged my briefcase meticulously. Notarized deeds, incorporation certificates, trust documentation, private correspondence, all prepared to challenge any assumptions. Before departing, I dialed Grace. Her insight had grounded me since returning to Maplewood. "They've been saying you turned your back on your dad," she cautioned. "Diana's milking the grieving widow image to the fullest. Expect manipulation." I let out a breath. "I'm not interested in creating a scene. I just want to fulfill what Dad envisioned." Silence crackled for a beat. "Okay, maybe part of me wants to wipe the smug look off her face," Grace chuckled. "That's more like it. Just remember he wanted you back, not just in name, but in purpose." Those words stirred something deep. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel as I approached the downtown building that housed Stevenson and Associates. Ironically, my father had owned the structure since I was a teenager, though I doubted Harold realized the title had been reassigned. Months ago, I arrived slightly early, wanting a moment to gather myself. The lobby's quiet hum offered a moment of reflection. Today wasn't just a legal formality, it was the culmination of years of exclusion, erasure, and manipulation. The woman at the reception desk blinked in surprise as I introduced myself. "Oh, Mr. Harrison, just a moment." She disappeared behind a frosted glass door, only to return accompanied by a visibly unsettled Harold. "Maxwell," he said flatly, foregoing a handshake. "This is ... unexpected. Today's meeting was intended to be a private discussion among immediate beneficiaries." I met his gaze evenly. "I am immediate family. My father's only biological child." Harold's discomfort was evident. "Given past separations, perhaps we could schedule a separate consultation." "No," I said firmly. "Let's begin." Without another word, I passed him, my steps echoing down the corridor toward the conference room. Voices quieted as I approached. I pushed open the door to a room arranged for formality: leather chairs, crystal water pitchers, a polished table that gleamed under recessed lighting. Diana sat at the head, garbed in designer morning attire that seemed tailored more for optics than grief. Her children flanked her, poised and composed, though I noted Tyler was already checking his phone under the table. Across from them sat familiar faces: my father's longtime banker, a distant cousin from Diana's side, and a well-dressed man I immediately recognized as representing Lawrence Blackwood, my father's fiercest business adversary. Diana's reaction was as rehearsed as a stage play. "Maxwell, what an unexpected ... development." Her voice held the faintest chill. "I came to hear my father's final words," I said, sliding into a seat directly opposite hers. She stiffened. "This meeting was supposed to include heirs only," she snapped. "You distanced yourself years ago." I said nothing, opening my briefcase and neatly aligning the contents in front of me. Harold shuffled forward and took his place at the head of the table. "Shall we begin?" he asked, fumbling with papers. Diana threw him a look, but he ignored it, clearly unsure how to proceed with my presence. "As executor of the estate," Harold began, "I am here to read the last will and testament of Richard Harrison." His voice carried a formal cadence, but I noticed the slight tremble in his hands as he began the legal preamble. I watched every face in the room. Diana played the grieving spouse expertly, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Tyler's expression remained detached, while Brittany's red-rimmed eyes hinted at sincere emotion, perhaps the only one in the room showing true loss to my wife. "Diana," Harold read, "I leave the family residence at 247 Maple Avenue, its furnishings, and a sum of $2 million. Diana exhaled softly, satisfied. She had assumed this was merely the beginning of a long list of assets she would soon command, but she was about to realize just how mistaken she had been. Diana merely gave a tight-lipped nod, as though everything Harold had recited had unfolded. Just as she predicted, her reaction lacked warmth or gratitude. It was more of a confirmation than a gift. The inheritance matched her expectations, nothing more, nothing less. When Harold turned the page and addressed Brittany, his voice remained composed. "To my stepdaughter, Brittany Winters, I bequeath the amount of $1 million, along with my treasured library of first-edition literature." Brittany blinked rapidly, visibly caught off guard. The money was one thing, but the books, that was unexpected. Everyone in the room knew those volumes represented decades of passion and precision. Each signed tome had a story, a journey, a personal memory attached. That legacy didn't seem to align with the path he'd mapped out for me. I stayed quiet, though a knot began to form. "In my chest," Harold continued without pausing, "to my stepson, Tyler Winters, I leave the sum of $1 million and the entirety of my vintage automobile collection." Tyler leaned back smugly, a crooked grin spreading across his face. He had always admired Dad's cars from afar, though I doubted he could tell a carburetor from a clutch. The pristine cherry red '65 Mustang alone was worth a small fortune. That car had once symbolized ambition, freedom, and long Sunday drives. Now it was just another asset being absorbed by someone who never appreciated its true worth. Then came the part that shifted the atmosphere like ATHUNDERCLAP. Harold cleared his throat. As for the holdings, shares and operations affiliated with Harrison Properties, I hereby leave all business-related interests and associated developments to my son, Maxwell Harrison. For a moment there was silence so absolute it rang in my ears. Diana's spine snapped straighter, her composure unraveling. Her facial expression darkened with confusion and disbelief. The confident veil slipped. She laughed, brittle and high-pitched. That's absurd, she spat. Richard altered the will 2 years ago. I was present when he signed it. Harold fidgeted, pushing his spectacles higher up his nose. A codicil was filed half a year ago, he explained with discomfort. It effectively reversed the previous provisions and restored the original succession plan. You failed to mention this? Diana hissed, her tone laced with outrage. It was only brought to my attention yesterday, Harold answered, choosing each word cautiously. Richard filed it directly with the probate court. I received the certified document late in the afternoon. Diana's smirk returned, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. It doesn't matter. I've been overseeing Harrison Properties for the past 12 months. The board respects my leadership. Maxwell can't just waltz in after vanishing for half a decade and expect to reclaim authority. I decided the time had come. Slowly I opened my briefcase, withdrew a stack of color-coded folders and placed them on the center of the mahogany table. Each was neatly labeled and notarized. These, I said calmly, are the official ownership certificates for the Riverside Development Land, the Central Business District Holdings, the Maple Street apartment complexes, and a dozen other high-yield ventures, all legally titled under my name. Diana's manicured hands trembled as she grabbed the papers, scanning page after page. Her silence screamed louder than any denial. Her fingernails clicked against the paper as she frantically searched for an error, a loophole, anything. These aren't genuine, she snapped finally. They've been fabricated. They're authentic, I replied evenly. Dad began. Transferring control years ago, the deeds were processed through the correct governmental channels. The public land registry corroborates everything. Tyler surged out of his seat, knocking over a glass of water in the process. You're bluffing, he barked. You can't just drop back into our lives and take it all. I kept my tone level. This isn't about possession, it's about fulfillment. My father prepared everything meticulously. I'm simply executing the instructions he left behind. Panic crept across Diana's face, her facade cracking. Harold, she demanded, is this even legally sound? The attorney hesitated, reviewing the embossed stamps and signatures. Every document appears valid, he admitted reluctantly. If these transactions occurred while Richard was still alive and mentally competent, then the assets aren't subject to probate. They fall outside the will's purview. And the business itself? Diana asked, her voice shrill with desperation. If the properties have been transferred, Harold replied, the corporation remains in name only. The Corworth land, leases properties, no longer resides within Harrison Properties. I nodded. Dad established a new enterprise last year, Harrison Legacy Holdings. All operations were reassigned. That company is mine exclusively. The conference room erupted. Tyler was red-faced, shouting threats of litigation. Diana hurled accusations at Harold, at me, at the universe. Brittany sat motionless, her gaze unreadable. The chaos felt oddly distant, as though I were watching a play unfold from backstage. When the noise subsided, I addressed the room again. My voice didn't rise, didn't need to. Diana, my father ensured you'd be comfortable. He left you, the residents, the investments, a few income-generating properties. You'll never need to worry about money. But he didn't trust you with his life's work. He knew your plans to strip and sell his achievements. You weren't even here, Diana cried, standing abruptly. You were thousands of miles away, while I cared for him during his decline. I wanted to return, I said. I reached out repeatedly. You told me he had no interest in speaking to me. For the first time, her expression faltered. A flicker of guilt surfaced before she veiled it with indignation. He was ashamed of your choices. If that were true, why did he spend his final years transferring everything to me? Why document his intentions so thoroughly? Brittany finally spoke, her voice wavering. Mom, is it true? Did you stop him from calling? Before Diana could protest, I answered. Yes, he recorded messages, letters, testimonies, all outlining his efforts to reconnect and how you intercepted them. Diana stiffened. What messages? I tapped my briefcase gently. Recordings, correspondence, statements, everything preserved. He was methodical. He left no room for confusion or manipulation. He wanted transparency, accountability, and above all, continuity. Harold coughed awkwardly. Perhaps it's best if we conclude for today. This is a substantial development and may require legal clarification. I agree, I said, standing and organizing my files. My legal team will handle the transition. Until further notice, no decisions regarding these assets should proceed without my consent. I turned to exit. Diana's voice sliced through the tension. This isn't over, Maxwell. Your father wasn't lucid at the end. We'll fight this. I'll take everything back. I paused in the doorway. You're free to contest. But no, he didn't just leave me property or power. He left behind irrefutable evidence. He trusted me to preserve his mission. Are you sure you want the public to hear that story? The air thickened with silence. I stepped into the hallway, my heart pounding not with fear, but purpose. I had fulfilled my father's final request. Now came the real task. Rebuilding. From the ruins Diana tried to sell by sunrise the following day, Maplewood was electric with rumors. In a community this tight-knit, secrets had a short shelf life. Even before reaching Bernard's bakery for my morning espresso, I had been met with curious glances, whispered greetings, and the occasional handshake. Bernard himself, grinning ear to ear, handed me a cinnamon twist without charge. Your old man would be proud, he said. People were worried about Diana auctioning off half the town. I offered a small nod. He didn't want it lost. He wanted it alive, and so the real work began. I offered Bernard a grateful smile and carried my coffee to a corner seat by the window, letting the warmth of the drink ground me as I took in the slow cadence of Main Street. 5 years had passed, yet this place seemed immune to time. The same bakery sign swung gently in the breeze, the courthouse still anchored. The far end of the square, noble and unchanged. Even the familiar crack in the pavement outside Wilson's barbershop hadn't been repaired. While my world had shifted, this town remained frozen in its small-town rhythm. Grace entered the cafe without a word, slipping into the chair opposite me and casually breaking off a piece of my cinnamon roll. You're Maplewood's favorite. Scandal, she said, her eyes twinkling. Diana spreading lies to anyone within earshot. Claims you tricked your father and are trying to rob her blind. She can shout whatever she wants, I replied, unfazed. Dad documented everything. Every paper, every signature recorded, time-stamped and airtight. Grace's teasing expression faded into something more solemn. Watch your back, Max. That woman has connections. And Lawrence Blackwood. He's enraged. Word is he lost millions when the Riverside deal fell apart. Before I could respond, Franklin Ross appeared beside us and pulled up a chair without waiting for an invitation. Morning, he greeted with a lopsided grin. Despite his gray hair and weathered face, he radiated sharpness. Heard the fireworks yesterday? Town hasn't seen this much excitement since the parade float caught fire during Founders Day. I brought him up to speed, recounting Diana's courtroom theatrics and the threats she threw around like confetti. Franklin merely waved a hand. In dismissal, empty threats, she's grasping at straws. Her legal footing's wobbly at best, but that doesn't mean she won't stir up chaos where she can. What kind of chaos are we talking about? I asked. Franklin leaned in. The social kind. Your stepmother spent years embedding herself into this town's elite circle's charities, boards, neighborhood groups. To the uninformed, she looks like the savior of Maplewood. They buy into her fantasy of upscale living in boutique riverfronts. She painted a pretty picture, Grace added. People love shiny things. They don't think about who gets priced out or how history gets bulldozed. I spent the rest of the afternoon at Harrison Properties, conducting quiet meetings with department heads. My focus was twofold. Reassure loyal employees and evaluate who had aligned themselves too closely with Diana. Most welcomed the shift in leadership. Her tenure had been marked by cuts, fear, and hasty decisions. A few, though, regarded me with suspicion. Clearly uncomfortable with the power transition, Margaret had prepared a stack of folders for me, meticulously labeled, thoroughly indexed. Her efficiency was a lifeline as I dug through files, uncovering how deeply Diana had gutted the firm. Liquid reserves had been drained. Contracts had been awarded to questionable bidders. Several land parcels were days from being sold below value. She had been cannibalizing the company, turning legacy into liquidation. By evening, I returned to the estate. Legally, it belonged to Diana now, though I still occupied the guest wing until I could secure a permanent residence. The house felt like a battlefield. Tension hung in the hallways like fog. Diana barely left her room, shooting daggers whenever our paths crossed. Tyler made no effort to hide his contempt. Doors slammed, curses muttered under breath. But Brit's behavior shifted that night. She appeared at my door, eyes uncertain but determined. Can we talk? She asked softly. I nodded, stepping aside to let her in. We'd never been particularly close. She had always followed her mother's lead, keeping a polite but cold distance. I waited. I want to apologize, she began, her voice wavering, for everything. For the way things unfolded with Richard. She hesitated over the name. He was always more of a father to you than to us, she admitted. Tyler acted like he cared about the business, but it was just a performance. He never respected the work, never wanted to learn, just wanted the perks. And you? I asked. I wanted a family, she confessed, eyes welling. When Mom married Richard, I hoped we'd finally be whole, but she was too busy scheming. She groomed Tyler to take over and kept you on the margins. I didn't agree, but I didn't know how to push back. I regarded her silently. Her words seemed sincere, but years of distrust didn't dissolve easily. Why now? I asked. Why tell me all this tonight? Brittany pulled a small leather-bound notebook from her purse. Because I found this, she said, offering it to me. It's Dad's journal from the last year. I opened it and immediately recognized the handwriting, deliberate, slanted, unmistakably his. Notes filled the pages, reflections on his health, commentary on the company, entries about me, about Diana. One entry detailed her meetings with Blackwood. Another expressed regret over our falling out and his growing unease with her influence. He saw through her, Brittany said. Near the end, he knew she was manipulating him. He tried to fix it the only way he could, by giving you everything. He couldn't say aloud, "Does she know you have this?" No. And she'd be furious if she did, but it doesn't matter. This belongs to you. I studied her face. You realize this could blow everything wide open? If I use this, your mother won't just lose control, she'll be humiliated. I know, Brittany said quietly, but she made her choices and I'm making mine. I want to stay here. I love this town. I want to help rebuild what she nearly destroyed. Before I could respond, raised voices echoed from downstairs. We both turned toward the noise. Rushing down, we found Diana and Tyler facing off with a stranger and older woman, with sharp eyes and features that reminded me of someone I couldn't quite place. You don't belong here, Diana hissed. Richard never acknowledged you. The woman's gaze shifted to me, her expression softening. You must be Maxwell, she said. I'm Alice Thornton. Richard was my father too. The revelation struck like a lightning bolt. I had a sister I'd never even known existed. A revelation dropped into an already turbulent week. Yet somehow it didn't feel like a lie. She's making it up. Diana spat, her voice edged with venom. Another desperate leech sniffing around for inheritance. But Alice's calm gaze didn't waver. I'm not here for money, she replied, tone steady. Richard and I maintained a private relationship, my choice. I just came to pay respects and meet my brother. She extended her hand gently toward me, her eyes hauntingly familiar. I stared into them. Recognizing the same quiet resolve my father had once carried, I took her hand for the first time in days. Something clicked into place. We have much to catch up on, I murmured, with an indignant huff. Diana recoiled as if scorched. I won't stand here and endure this circus. Come, Tyler. She swept from the room, her heels clattering like gunshots across the floor. Tyler lumbered after her, his posture tight with anger. Brittany lingered, uncertain, before quietly slipping away. I remained alone now with Alice. Her smile was soft, hesitant. Not quite how I pictured our first encounter. Nothing this week has followed expectations, I replied with a weary chuckle, but I'd like to know more about you and about your connection with Dad. We moved into the parlor, where shadows danced against the fireplace. Alice spoke slowly, unraveling the story of her mother's brief romance with Richard years. Before he'd met mine, she'd learned about her paternity only in adulthood. My father, always discreet, had welcomed her into his world quietly, respecting her wishes to avoid attention. He used to mention you often, she told me, spoke with such pride about your accomplishments overseas, but I could see he missed you terribly. Each word twisted my insides with conflicting emotions: sorrow for time lost, relief that Dad had found someone to confide in, anger that I hadn't been there. Yet through it all pulsed a growing determination. Diana had worked tirelessly to erase what Richard stood for, but he had planned around her. He had fought for the dream we shared, Devon, in silence. Later that night, I returned to reviewing company files, my room scattered with papers and printouts. Just as I finished annotating a development projection, my phone buzzed. An unfamiliar number. We need to talk. This isn't over. Lawrence Blackwood. The message was short, but it said everything. The war for Maplewood's soul had only just begun. The following weeks blurred into a storm of meetings, strategy sessions, and damage control. I took the helm of Harrison Properties officially, coordinating closely with Margaret as we untangled the web Diana had spun. Employees, many of whom had feared for their positions under her, expressed visible relief. "This is the leadership we needed," Margaret told me one morning as we reviewed staffing logs. "Your father would have been proud." Not everyone welcomed me back. A portion of the board, closely tied to Diana's agenda, resigned almost immediately. Lawrence, meanwhile, launched an aggressive media push, painting me as a disconnected heir with no true ties to the community. It was spin, but I knew how narratives work, and how easily small-town loyalties could shift. Then, unexpectedly, Diana reached out. A formal request delivered through her attorney, asking for a private sit-down. "Watch your back," Franklin warned when I told him. "She never plays fair. If she's offering peace, there's a dagger behind it." Grace insisted on accompanying me. She waited in the reception area, arms crossed protectively, while I entered the negotiation room. Diana looked immaculate. As always, flawless makeup, crisp tailoring, but something was off. Her eyes had lost their shine. The past month had hollowed her, even if she refused to show it. "I'm proposing a resolution," she began flatly, avoiding scandal. "No more courtrooms or headlines." Her lawyer slid a document forward. "Mrs. Harrison is prepared to relinquish all legal claims in exchange for exclusive development rights over the Riverside parcel." I blinked, then nearly laughed aloud. "The crown jewel?" I asked. "You want the heart of the portfolio handed over in a settlement?" "That project was mine," she snapped. "I built it. Richard and I designed it together." "Dad envisioned it long before your involvement," I countered, voice even. "He wanted affordable housing, community gardens, public access to the riverfront, not penthouses and designer shops." Diana's mask slipped. "The world's changing, Maxwell. Sentimentality doesn't build a future." Richard understood that before the end. I pulled out my phone and tapped a recording. My father, standing on that very land, explaining why economic inclusivity mattered, why he had chosen to entrust it to me. Her expression twisted. He was ill. He didn't know what he was doing. He was lucid enough to finalize legal transfers and explain his reasoning on video multiple times. The meeting ended with no resolution. Diana stormed out once again, her attorney issuing vague warnings of lawsuits that never came. Franklin later confirmed her legal team had advised against it. Her position was legally indefensible. Meanwhile, I was forging something new. Alice and I began to build a relationship. She had no interest in the business, focused instead on environmental education and research. Her passion gave me an idea, one Dad would have loved. We started reworking the Riverside blueprint to include solar infrastructure, green rooftops, and walkable trails. "Richard always wanted projects that benefited the town," Alice said. "This honors that." To my surprise, Brittany became an unexpected partner in the transition. She'd moved into a modest apartment in town and cut ties with Diana's inner circle. Over coffee one afternoon, she said, "I want to help rebuild the company the right way. You're not afraid of backlash?" I asked. "I'm done letting Mom dictate who I am," she replied. She was selling art, jewelry, even furniture to fund legal threats. "That's not strength, it's desperation." Together, we pressed forward, and through it all I could feel Dad beside Min, the plans, the people, and the purpose. His voice echoed in every decision I made. Diana had tried to bury his ideals, but Richard Harrison's legacy wasn't property or prestige, it was vision. And now, I would carry it into the future. "I believe she's getting ready to disappear from Maplewood altogether," Brittany murmured during our last conversation. Her voice carried the fatigue of someone who'd seen too much, too young. Diana had been quietly selling off her personal possessions, antique jewelry, rare art, imported furniture. It was no longer speculation. She was preparing for an exit. Tyler, meanwhile, had become a ghost of his former self. Whatever smugness he once wore like armor had long since dissolved. Whispers about his involvement in questionable decisions under Diana's regime had spread like wildfire. Former allies now avoided his gaze. Social invitations dried up. Even local business owners, once eager to curry favor, refused to return his calls. But the turning point came at the town council forum. I stood at the podium, presenting the revised vision for the Riverside site. Gone were any trace of exclusivity or corporate luxury. In its place stood a community-first approach: inclusive homes, co-op retail space for local artisans, public parks, and a community center dedicated to youth development and job training. "This is what Richard Harrison imagined," I declared, voice steady. "Not some playground for outsiders, but a future for the people who've always called this place home." Blackwood, true to form, arrived with a slick pitch deck, complete with renderings of waterfront penthouses and valet-only dining establishments. His charisma was intact, but when pressed about affordability, infrastructure strain, and environmental impact, his answers fell flat. Grace stood from the audience, her tone crisp and passionate. The Harrison blueprint respects the soul of this town. The alternative caters only to wallets, not roots. Applause erupted, and moments later, the council cast their votes unanimous. My proposal was adopted. Blackwood's plan was dead. As the chamber emptied, Lawrence approached, shoulders tense but posture upright. "You've claimed this round, Harrison," he muttered. "Not without admiration. But the game isn't over. It doesn't have to be adversarial," I replied. "You bring construction expertise. I bring local trust. There's room to collaborate if you're open to doing it right." His brow furrowed, visibly caught off guard by the olive branch. "Why would you extend that?" "Because Dad believed good business could also be just," I answered. "He taught me that legacy matters." We didn't finalize any deal that evening, but something shifted. A rivalry tempered into possibility. My last encounter with Diana didn't happen under courtroom lighting, but beneath a twilight sky in the overgrown backyard of what had once been home. I had returned one last time to gather old photo albums and a few keepsakes. There she sat, alone on the stone bench beside my mother's rose garden. She looked smaller, more brittle, stripped of the veneer she'd carefully curated. She didn't rise when I approached. "I'm leaving," she said flatly. "There's no purpose left for me here." "Where will you go?" I asked. "Connecticut. My sister's expecting me." Her eyes lingered on mine. "You've won, Maxwell. You got the business, the goodwill. Even Brittany, is that enough?" "It wasn't about winning," I answered, keeping my distance. "It was about restoring what mattered." "For Maplewood? For Dad?" She considered that, eyes scanning the garden where spring blooms pressed upward despite the season's chill. "He changed after you left," she said finally. "More withdrawn. I thought if I immersed myself in the business, I'd reconnect with him, but somewhere along the line it became about power," I said softly. She didn't argue. "I'm not ashamed for wanting security," she said. "I grew up with nothing. That fear never leaves you. Dad made sure you and the kids were taken care of," I reminded her. "That was never in question," she replied, standing now, brushing dust from her jacket. "But it's over. I've instructed my attorney to withdraw all remaining objections. In exchange, I expect you to uphold what Richard promised for me and the children. I already planned to." One solemn nod, and with that, she turned and walked away. No tears, no drama, just quiet acceptance. I remained in the garden for a while, watching the wind stir petals from the last of the roses. What I felt wasn't triumph, it was peace. We hadn't been a real family. Not really. But somehow, in the ruins, new bonds had formed, with Alice, with Brittany, and with Maplewood. The following morning marked a new beginning. Inside Harrison Properties boardroom, the atmosphere brimmed with renewed energy. Faces around the long table, some familiar, others newly hired, reflected optimism. Brittany, now part of the communications team, offered a quick thumbs up from her seat. I stood and addressed them. "My father used to say, real estate is about permanence," I began. "What we create here will outlive all of us. Let's make it meaningful." As the team dispersed to begin work, Grace stopped beside me, her smile proud. "He'd be proud of you, Max," she said. For the first time since coming back, I believed it, truly believed it. The legacy had been rescued, but more importantly, it had been reborn. I believe he would be proud, and this is merely the beginning. Exactly 1 year after returning to Maplewood, I stood on the newly constructed observation platform that overlooked the evolving Riverside district. What had once been barren and neglected was now vibrant with activity. Steel frames climbed toward the sky. Workers buzzed like bees, laying bricks and installing pipes. And fresh foundations hinted at a future forged from both memory and purpose. Low cost housing surrounded a large communal lawn where children would someday laugh and families could gather. Adjacent to that, groundwork had commenced for a cultural hall and business accelerator, hub elements my father once envisioned but never saw realized. "Impressive sight," Franklin said, appearing at my side. Richard would be smiling if he could see this. I turned to him, my eyes tracing the bronze signage bearing my father's name. Richard Harrison Memorial Park. It stood proudly near the entrance, a lasting tribute to the man whose ideas had once shaped this town and who had fought quietly, strategically to protect it from exploitation. The past 12 months had shifted everything. In stepping into my father's shoes, I'd shed the nomadic lifestyle that once defined me. I wasn't merely a project overseer or figurehead anymore. I had become a stakeholder in Maplewood's identity. The transformation hadn't come easy. It demanded sacrifices, late nights, hard decisions, and the constant need to defend integrity. Over shortcuts, the Education Board just approved all 15 scholarships for this cycle. Alice reported as she walked toward me, tablet in hand. Since relocating to Maplewood, my half-sister had become instrumental in establishing and running the Richard Harrison Foundation. She worked tirelessly guiding students toward careers in urban planning and eco-friendly infrastructure. That's wonderful, I said, flipping through the digital profiles and our internship initiative, launching next month. 3 colleges have signed agreements. We're expecting a full cohort. Alice had become more than family. She was a bridge between what had been lost and what now bloomed in its place. Through her, I'd discovered chapters of my father's story I'd never known: his clandestine support for underprivileged students, the anonymous donations to single mothers, the startup grants for minority-owned businesses. It turned out Richard Harrison hadn't just left behind structures, he'd left behind values. 2. He never wanted accolades. Alice once told me, he just wanted to make quiet improvements. Following that philosophy, I shifted Harrison Properties' direction. It was no longer about profits alone. We began prioritizing sustainability, accessibility, and inclusiveness. 7. When it slowed us down or complicated deals. This shift drew both praise and resistance. Lawrence Blackwood remained our loudest opponent. He rallied conservative investors and argued against every public good initiative. But for each roadblock he raised, we met it with innovation and transparency. Lawrence plans to attend next week's council hearing, Brittany informed me as we strolled through a new plaza, where workers were installing bike racks and solar-powered streetlights. He's lobbying hard against our second phase of affordable rentals. Do you have a strategy? I asked, knowing Brittany had inherited her mother's instinct for maneuvering but repurposed it for something far more valuable. I've arranged for 3 families to speak single parents who now have safe homes and stable lives thanks to this project. Lawrence can talk numbers, they'll speak from the heart. Brittany's evolution had been one of the biggest surprises. Once a distant presence, she now played a crucial role in shaping our communications. Her insight into Maplewood's subtle politics, gained through years of watching Diana manipulate social circles, proved indispensable. Back at headquarters, Margaret handed me a thick folder. Final documents, she said. This severs all of Diana's ownership rights in the company. She accepted the buyout terms. I glanced through the pages, then reached for a pen. Any updates from her? Not personally, but according to Brittany, she's remarried, living in Greenwich, joined an art museum board, calls herself a cultural philanthropist now. There was no bitterness in my reaction, only acceptance. Diana had followed her nature until the end. My father, by contrast, had followed his conscience, and I had been given the task of turning that conscience into action. As I entered my office once, my father's, now my own, paused to admire its familiar layout. I'd preserved the Monte Cristo painting above the fireplace. My father's desk remained in place, now flanked by photographs of the people who had defined this journey. Alice, Brittany, Grace, Franklin, and even a snapshot of Tyler. Now a restauranta with a thriving bistro on Main Street. Tyler's actually doing well, Margaret had told me recently, surprised. He's got staff, pays them fairly, even donates leftovers to the shelter. Against her advice, I'd leased him one of our downtown properties at a discounted rate. Not out of sentimentality, but because I saw a spark in him, a willingness to prove he could create something worthwhile. Separate from his mother's ambitions, the sun dipped lower in the sky, gilding the town in orange and gold. I called up the project dashboard on my computer and checked the final task of the day, reviewing applications for the Margaret Williams Memorial Scholarship, named after my late mother. It was my final tribute to the woman who raised me with quiet, strength, and grace. As I clicked through the applications, Grace texted, "Dinner still on. 7 p.m. sharp." I smiled. This wasn't the end of the story, it was merely the foundation for everything still to come. That scholarship was one of the very first ideas I set into motion after stepping into my father's shoes at Harrison Properties. More than just a gesture, it felt like the beginning of something restorative. The Elizabeth Harrison Fellowship wasn't about publicity, was a promise, a tribute to my mother's abandoned dream of becoming an architect. Life and circumstance had prevented her from ever drafting blueprints or designing buildings, but her creativity had never faded. I remembered how she would sketch out imaginary homes on napkins, whispering ideas about sustainable spaces before the concept was even trendy. She had an eye for detail and a heart full of ambition that never got its due. That legacy, long buried under family drama and time, was finally being honored. The first batch of graduates walked the stage this spring. The program director shared over the phone earlier that afternoon, her voice carrying both pride and anticipation. Most of them are eager to intern with us. They've heard what you've done with Riverside. I'd thanked her, my throat tightening just slightly, and promised we'd open doors for every one of those young women. That call stayed with me long after I hung up. Standing at the tall window in my office, I let the skyline of Maplewood wrap around my thoughts. The golden tint of the setting sun washed across rooftops and cast long shadows over the streets I once couldn't wait to leave. That rainy morning in Singapore when I got the call about my father's passing felt like it had happened to someone else. I'd been furious, disillusioned, driven by nothing more than a need to reclaim what I believed had been unjustly taken. I'd boarded that plane consumed by resentment, prepared for war, but somewhere in the chaos that followed through legal documents, power struggles, family confrontations, and old wounds, my objective shifted. My journey wasn't just about reclaiming wealth or proving a point anymore. It became about reconstructing bridges, reestablishing trust, and preserving a vision that deserved to live beyond ledger sheets and profit margins. What had once been about revenge slowly transformed into stewardship. I wasn't just managing properties, I was shaping futures. Even that explosive will reading, where I had dropped the property deeds on the polished oak table like a royal flush, had lost its sharp edge in my memory. It had been satisfying, sure, dramatic even, but the lasting fulfillment hadn't come from that victorious moment. It came afterward in boardroom discussions with hopeful interns, in late-night brainstorming sessions with Alice about green infrastructure, in seeing people move into homes they once thought they could never afford. That was the true inheritance. Not the skyscrapers or the trust accounts. Not the shiny plaques or official titles. Bigger than all of us that evening, I met Grace at our favorite little bistro on Elm Street. We always asked for the table near the fireplace. Her smile as I approached was the same one that had steadied me during my most chaotic moments. In the year since I'd returned, what started as friendship had blossomed into something deeper, more grounding. Grace hadn't just supported my return, she had helped me belong again. "How was the meeting with the scholarship board?" she asked, stirring her tea. "Good," I replied, unable to suppress a smile. 15 recipients this year. All of them eager, passionate, and ridiculously smart. One even mentioned wanting to design community-focused developments someday. "Sounds like someone I know," she teased gently. We laughed, the comfort between us unspoken. Over dinner, we caught up on everything from marketing strategies for Harrison properties to the new art installation going up near the Riverwalk. But my thoughts kept drifting back to the ring tucked away in my jacket, pocket simple, elegant, and chosen with care. I had bought it a week ago, waiting for the right moment. Maybe tonight was it. "You mentioned the view from the Riverside Lookout," Grace said as we finished dessert. "Still offering sunset tours?" "Always," I answered, my heart starting to race. We strolled side by side beneath the amber streetlights, the river shimmering beside us. Hand in hand, we reached the platform overlooking the development, now beautifully lit with warm lanterns and soft floodlights that gave the space a golden halo. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, glancing at me with gentle curiosity. I took a breath, staring out at the land that had changed my life. My mother, my father, everything they hoped to build. And how, somehow, I get to continue it. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. I turned to her, pulled the box from my coat, and opened it. "Grace," I said softly, "I came back to fight for my family's legacy, but I found something I never expected: home. With you. Will you build the next chapter with me?" Her eyes welled with tears. "Yes," she whispered, before throwing her arms around me, and just like that, under the same stars that had watched over Maplewood for generations. The next chapter of my story began, not with vengeance, but with hope. "Legacy," I said. "Softly, it's what endures after we're gone. The echoes of our choices, the memory of who we were." Grace squeezed my hand in quiet affirmation. "Your father would be proud, Max, of all of it, of you." I smiled, eyes fixed on the horizon where the golden light stretched over the development that now stood as a testament to resilience, vision, and reconciliation. For the first time in years, I felt still. Not because the battles were over, but because I had learned to carry them without bitterness. The man I once resented had, in the end, orchestrated a future that reflected his deepest hopes. He wasn't perfect, none of us are, but his intentions, though clouded at times by regret and distance, had become crystal clear. He had built more than structures. He had constructed possibilities. As we reached the top of the Riverside observation deck, the wind brushed past us, carrying the scent of fresh wood, river air, and blooming potential. Beneath us stretched the new face of Maplewood, evolving landscape shaped not by greed or vanity. The community center's framework gleamed under the dusk sky, and the laughter of children playing in the completed greenway below floated upward. It was a promise. Kept my hand slipped into my coat pocket, fingers brushing the velvet box I'd carried for days. It wasn't heavy from gold or diamonds, but from meaning. Her eyes reflected both joy and patience. She had known somehow. She had always known before words could leave my mouth. A gust of wind curled around us, And with it came something intangible, a whisper of my mother's quiet elegance, my father's determined gaze, Alice's quiet encouragement, Brittany's newfound clarity, even Tyler's reluctant peace. Everything and everyone who had brought me to this moment was present, woven invisibly into the air between us. "This," I murmured, "is home." Grace blinked, eyes misty. It always was. I knelt, opened the box, and asked her to build a life with me, one of substance. Grand or elaborate, but deeply felt. A dinner with close friends, toasts at the riverside promenade. The townspeople who once whispered about my return now smiled and offered heartfelt congratulations. The legacy of division had transformed into a story of community healing. Over the following months, we broke ground on new phases of the development, launched additional community programs through the Harrison Foundation, and continued expanding internship opportunities for local youth. Every blueprint we approved felt like another chapter being written in the town's renewal. Brittany thrived in her new role at the company. Lecture series at the community center, even Tyler's restaurant had become a landmark. Maplewood had found a rhythm again, one that balanced heritage with progress, memory with movement. In my office, now filled with symbols of growth-framed plans, letters from scholarship recipients, a photograph of my parents smiling under the oak tree behind the family home, I often paused to reflect on what had been lost, on what had been salvaged. Yes, you, watching this right now, have you ever had to reclaim something that belonged to you? Not just in name, but in meaning. Or maybe you've wrestled with choosing peace over vengeance, healing over bitterness. Tell me, I want to know. Share your moments of courage and clarity in the comments. Let's build a space where stories like this, real, raw, and full of possibility, can find a home. If this journey moved you, if it made you think about family, legacy, or the power of returning not just to places, but to yourself, then please like this video and subscribe for more true stories that reveal the strength in forgiveness, the courage in truth, and the beauty in rebuilding, because sometimes the most priceless inheritance isn't wealth or property. It's wisdom, it's purpose, it's the chance to turn the past into something brighter than you ever imagined. Thank you for watching, and remember, what we build and who we become while building it, that's the legacy that truly lasts.